reason I built this deck 2 days ago is because I've been talking about eCASH since January, but I failed to realize that I had anything other than just a big sum of notes. And so I wanted to take all those notes and aggregate them into a deck. One of the guests we have here, Mr. Chris Bowen, I'm actually EIR for Soaring City, which is a organization that he's the chairman of. And so I was telling him, I said, this is kind of the dry run for our Soaring Series project. And so you guys are kind of going to be the guinea pigs for this, so just bear with me a little bit. Oh, and one last thing. I almost cut off my finger the other day, and so I have to take pain medication. So if I seem a little loopy or seem a little hyper, blame the medication, don't blame me. I promise I'm not like this all the time.
What do we do if that thing slings out?
So I was gonna say, if you can mint it, right, turn it NFT, like, hey, just, split me some money, since that's the theme of what we're talking about. So who the heck am I? Why am I an expert, quote unquote, to be talking about eCash? Well, I wouldn't say that I'm an expert talking about eCash, but I do know eCash because it is a part of what I do at my company, Allison. So Allison is a fintech company that essentially connects centralized finance, so community banks, regional banks, local banks, to decentralized finance. So crypto companies, Web3 properties, blockchain companies, we basically say these are assets that don't have a backing, going back to what Sam was talking about before. They don't have a backing, right? They don't have gold, they don't have US dollar. And then you have these entities that have fiat currency that can control US dollars. Allison puts them together, right? So now you have a backed asset. And that's what I do. That's what my CTO, Chris Willingham, also does. Shout out to Chris, because he's the one that builds all this stuff. So it's really him, not me. As I mentioned, I'm also entrepreneur resident for Soaring City. So Soaring City is the project that you see along these corridors that's really going to start to reinvest and reinvigorate this area into an innovation space. Chris likes to use the line, tech meets art innovation. I kind of steal that a little bit. So that's really what we're looking to do. 2 successful exits. I know that's a typo. It's been bothering me for 2 days, but we're just gonna leave it up there. 2 successful exits from a fintech company. Why that's important is I want to go back to something that Sam was saying. I know some of you folks were not here for his previous talk, but he talked about sort of the pathway to entrepreneurship, right? It's never a linear line, right? You have some starts and stops, some U-turns, some curves, things like that. My story is no different. I had 2 successful exits from companies that I did not personally, I was not the CEO of, right? I was just a product guy, a tech guy. From that seat, it was very easy just to build things that people needed and build things that people wanted to pay for. Doing it as a CEO is a vastly different enterprise, and I'll be clear with you on that. I've had some really big setbacks this year, but ultimately, that's one of the reasons why I keep doing what I do. So going back to Sam's point about your why, there's a really good book by Sam Sinek that talks about learning your why and the whys of these larger companies. My why is that I do like to create and I do like to solve problems, whether they make money or not. So that's kind of tied into what we're going to talk about today here with eCash. And so what is eCash? But before we get to that, and I promise we're going to get to it, let's talk about this. $1. I didn't even have this. I had to borrow that from Glenn, right? Like that's how much I don't have physical cash. Just by show of hands, anybody got $1 in the pocket? Okay, well I need to borrow $1 from you. See me after the class. But like, this is how much most folks just don't even have this anymore, right? So this can be used to go to the store. This can be used to buy goods and services. This is how our economy is really run. And so this version of the US dollar was first created in 1914 by the Fed, the Federal Reserve Bank. Anybody familiar with the Fed? Okay, good, a couple folks, good. So the Federal Reserve Bank was created in 1913, the year before that, as the central banking system in the US. So that means the Fed basically controls the monies that are designated by the US government, right? And so the Fed actually, the Fed controls it, the US Treasury prints it. What's the next one? All right. So it's the Bureau of Engraving and Printing under the jurisdiction of the US Department of Treasury. So they're the ones that are actually printing this physical dollar. So remember, the Fed controls it, but the Treasury prints it. Now, let's get back to eCash, I promise. Okay, so what is eCash in a nutshell? It's a digitally replicated US dollar. It's essentially a digital copy of that dollar that I have in my pocket right now. And going back to something that was again during Sam's workshop where I talked about anonymity, the purpose of eCash is to maintain the same anonymity you would have using a physical dollar. Now you can track a dollar, right? They have serial numbers, those type of things, but that's not really a real-time process, right? You think about the terror cells network, the terror cell networks that were tracked and traced after 9/11. It wasn't in real time. It was them following a paper trail of anti-money laundering patterns that had to do with the serial numbers of the monies and the dollars that they were using.
I just have a quick question so I can continue at the level you're speaking. I understand everything you're talking about. Is eCash something you invented? Is it an app? Is it a widely accepted term, kind of like fiat?
So eCash, and we'll talk about here and this as well. So eCash is a bill that's been proposed by Congress for the Treasury Department. That's why I wanted to make the distinction between the Fed and the Treasury.
Got it.
Right.
I've been hearing about that. I didn't know the name.
Are you referring to the central bank digital currency?
No.
That's not.
No. So the eCash bill, HR 7231,
Okay.
that's an actual act. You can go to the Treasury Department's website and they have an FAQ about it. And I'll talk about it here, but that's effectively what eCash is. This is going to be a digital bearer token provided by the U.S. government that folks are going to be able to use as they would regular cash. And while talking about the
Basically,
nuances,
it's going to represent the paper.
yes, exactly. It's going to be a digital representation of this paper.
Nice. Okay.
Well, it's not even a derivative, right? It's a matching bearer token. So again, technical details. You're right, but that's the technicality of it.
Okay.
So how would that be, say, different than the central bank digital currency that they're proposing?
So this is so again, and I'll talk about it here in just a sec. The purpose of eCash is to be a bearer token provided exclusively by the Treasury Department. So the Treasury, so this is the Treasury Department's baby, essentially.
For the U.S.
For the United States.
So central bank, that's not a U.S. thing, right? Who's the central bank?
I'm not as familiar, to be honest with you.
Who's the central bank?
So the Federal Reserve is talking about coming out with that digital currency and to replace the dollar with it.
Which is eCash.
No. So this is the
Is it
Treasury.
the same thing?
Okay.
That's what I'm asking.
It's essentially the same thing, but but different organizations and a different actual token.
Yeah, because in 2021, they came out with like a 30-page report about
Right.
the testing, how they're doing it, and then
Yes.
China's testing it,
Right.
and then it showed a whole map of the global world and where they are with their testing compared to how far are they to actually coming out with it. So that's what I was trying to say. Is it the same thing? And I guess it's not.
No, it's not. But the concept is the same, right? Let's focus on concept. The concept is absolutely the same. And so it's a true bearer instrument. Going back to your point, right? And it's just like paper money. So you're talking about not dealing with settlements. You're talking about not having to convert your money, right? When you think about digital assets, you think about the conversion of it. So going back to what Allison does. So someone purchases $1,000 worth of Ethereum or $1,000 worth of Bitcoin. Allison in the background is aggregating the partnerships to make the actual conversion happen. So a bank says, I will honor the US dollar value of this digital asset, right? So Allison then is the intermediary for those two entities to perform that action. Here, none of that has to happen. None of it. All you have to do is have a device, and your device has to be eCash ready, and you'll have a balance. And you'll be able to go to 7-Eleven and purchase anything you want. You'll be able to give someone a portion of your eCash balance as if it were legal tender, because it will be legal tender. And so you can transfer a balance from one person to another through your device, right? So it could be your iPhone, it could be your Android phone. It's still very early, so they haven't really defined out which devices they're gonna be using, but just think of a centralized application on your existing device that then controls the money that you have, right? And you don't even have to go to a bank in order to convert it.
Sorry, I should probably be reading your white paper first, but I was very curious, very fascinating.
Mhm.
So my Bank of America account, there's $100 in there. When I do, transfers and buy things and do ACH, am I now gonna be able to keep in eCash if they're value for value?
So think of your phone now as your Bank of America account, without the actual Bank of America part.
So there's gonna be a wallet on
Yep, there's gonna be a wallet on your phone, an eCash wallet. I wanna talk about that though, because this is kind of why. So the spirit behind eCash is to say, look, we wanna mirror the anonymity of the dollar, right? So if I'm going to buy drugs, I can go buy my drugs with my money, and no one will never know other than having the serial number. They want to mirror that. I mean, that's effectively what they want to do. I argue that they are enabling banks to add more traceability to transactions now. And I'll talk about that in a
Yes,
second.
that's true, because if it's got the serial number in the eCash emblem, and you're not tracing a dollar is like.
Exactly. And so the pros, instant settlement, right? No settlement time. The no track mandate, that's literally what it says in the bill, right? There's a no track mandate. Don't track this money in this way. In terms of the transactional data. So they're tracking the serial numbers, but they're not tracking what they were used to purchase for, right? So they're not tracking, hey, you spent this on bananas at Publix. They're not tracking that you spent this on a skateboard at a skate shop or something like that. So that's kind of the mandate from the Treasury Department. And then there's no need for things like money orders. So one of the things that we're attempting to do with the Soaring City project is we want to revitalize this corridor, right? So from 275 down Fowler, this is the innovation corridor we want to reinvest in. And so part of that is there's a ton of pawn shops around here, right? We have a pawn shop economy around here because folks don't have money and they need money, and so they get it how they can get it, right? And so ultimately, the money order industry makes a ton of money on fees because to pay the rent, they have to go and convert it to a money order and spend $5, $10, whatever it is. That goes away with eCash, right? A landlord will have to take an eCash payment. That would be a federally mandated thing, just like they would have to take $1. It's legal currency. Now, let's talk about the cons though, because you guys have asked some really good questions, and I really want to kind of deconstruct this a little bit. If you lose your device that has your eCash balance, you lose your money. If I go to the beach and I have this in my wallet, and my wallet falls out, I lose my cash. It ain't no give backs. And this is and again, it mirrors the dollar. This mirrors the dollar, so it's going to function just like the dollar would. So if you have $20,000 on your phone and you lose your eCash balance, now there may be some public key stuff that happens there. The Treasury Department still hasn't really defined what that's going to look like, so there may be some recovery portions of it. But if this is true dollars, then no, I can't get it back. It's gone.
I can't see how it could adopt it if there's not some kind of recovery, because even Coinbase gives you the ability to, right?
So let's talk about that here in just a bit. The differences between the way the Treasury Department sees sort of digital cryptocurrencies and the way that they see this eCash currency, and we'll talk about that. So I argue that there will be more traceability with eCash. So think about what I was talking about with Allison, right? So remember, Allison was just the middleman between a bank and a crypto company or a fintech company or some company that needs a bank. That's all Allison really does. Let's say, going back to the Bank of America example, Bank of America says to Allison, hey, we want a way to track the eCash balances on behalf of our users, right? We want to offer them more products and services, right? They can check their checking account, they can check their savings and their credit. Why not add an ability to track their eCash balance? Well, I'm an entrepreneur, and if they're going to pay me to do that, I'm going to figure out how to do that. So I'm going to get an API from the Treasury Department to be able to check serial numbers. I'm going to keep a centralized database of those serial numbers and which users were issued which amounts, and I'm going to report that back to the bank. So now the bank effectively is tracking what you're actually paying for in terms of the eCash balance. Like they know what you're using when you spend money in your checking account, unless you take out cash, right? You go to an ATM and take out $5, they don't know what you spend that money for. They knew you took it out. They don't know what you spend it on.
That's interesting. So like those services we were talking about that are being developed around Bitcoin, like the Lightning Network.
Mhm.
So transactions can happen, so now maybe your development will go more around eCash.
That's right.
Interesting.
And so when you brought that up, that's why I didn't say much, just because the conversations I've been having over the last month have been centered around that specific scenario.
Well, the more traceable, it's like, I know they do have, privacy against the government, but not through third parties. It's more flexible through third parties to track, your privacy, like, they can get your information and buy your information and all that stuff.
It's the Facebook dilemma, right? You sign up for Facebook or Meta, whatever they call it, and you basically say, the usage that I have on this platform, you can store and use for whatever you want. That's the covenant you enter when you sign up for that, right? So if you do have a third party like Bank of America says anything that touches our accounts, our core, we have access to report to the government, right? I would argue that the government, so let's back all the way up. And I'll talk about this here in a little bit, but what is the government's view on cryptocurrency? Like, I mean, I'm sure you all are pretty learned and have seen a few things. What do you think is the top level view of governments and cryptocurrency?
Too risky.
Challenge to their power, to their
A way
authority.
of avoiding paying taxes.
So all three of those things are correct.
Right.
But but going back to Sam's point about results, it all boils down to it challenges their power. Because at the end of the day, the government has a standing army. And Bitcoin and the companies that leverage Bitcoin and Ethereum don't have standing armies. Larger army diplomacy. That's all it boils down to. We have an army, you don't. So
Right.
we're gonna have our own currency. This is what we wanna promote. We wanna control it. Because we can't tax it reasonably, or we can't tax it to the level that we want. We don't think that we can, I'm talking about them. They then say, okay, we'll create our own. And that's all it really boils down to. So going back to the point about traceability, they can then work with those third parties, like my company and Bank of America and different organizations to say, hey, look, I want you to be tracking this and reporting it back to us. So the government isn't tracking it directly,
Mm-hmm.
but they are enabling it to be tracked. And that's the key thing.
Especially if it's blockchain.
Exactly. And so that's why I want to really stress the idea that eCash can be a tool that can be leveraged, that again can displace money orders, that can make things more efficient and cheaper for the consumer. But what are you giving up to get that? And that's always my point is that, to get, you have to give.
Wired did a really good article, I think, in this month's issue, tracking down child abuse rings.
Mm-hmm.
And basically what they would do is they would look at wallets and they would look at common things that those wallets purchased. And while the money was transferred, okay, maybe this transfer was hidden, but then they went and bought something. And then they disclosed who they were through other transactions.
That's right.
And the other transactions that are linked together disclose your location, your identity,
Correct.
and they've gone through it. Yeah, they saw the patterns and they were
of culprits too. Like if you're in a certain game, this is your pattern, regardless, and here's
There's always a pattern.
boom. Yeah.
So this is how the 9/11 terrorists were captured, right? Like when we did so the reason I know this is because Jorge Guerrero was the chief compliance officer of the last startup I exited out of. And so Jorge was the guy that literally started to identify, oh, these guys are buying these cell phones. These guys are buying these prepaid cards, and was able to trace the network from doing this sort of backward lookup. But to trace his point, this pattern matching, this is exactly what I would fear. And I don't want to say fear, because that would give the wrong connotation. I don't want that much power unchecked.
You know what's interesting, Ryan, is that because you're talking about initially you were talking about the Fed, which is our central bank essentially,
Yep.
and Treasury, which is connected, but it's got a different deal. And it's
That's right.
interesting the motivations of these players. Like Fed, I'm concerned, lots of concerns about. They want to control. They're a central, and they don't like this decentralized
That's right.
thing, and so they want their own digital that is centralized, right? But then the Treasury is interesting because you wonder about their motivations. On one hand, you understand that most of what they're printing, $1 costs more than $1 to print.
Correct.
A penny costs more than a penny to mint. You know,
Right.
so it's very, very expensive. It's management. It's like having a property. Once you have currency, it's like property managers,
Mhm.
right? That's expensive,
Mhm.
right? And then I could see them saying, forget about all the other tracking and controlling all that. It would just be nice to have a digital currency that we could really, you know, it would be more efficient
Less overhead.
to produce,
Yes,
to
right.
monitor, manage everything, just like, you know, the management of it. But then, as a byproduct, because it obviously probably is blockchain based, it's digital, there's ability, you get the control. But the other thing is, what's interesting, if that's how it's kind of gonna roll out, my thought is, are they, first of all, trying to say, you know, look, we're not gonna track this. This is just like your dollar. We're not gonna track it because we want you to adopt it. We want you to feel comfortable to start using the digital dollar, and we're not gonna track it, just like the dollar. But at some point, we all know,
They're gonna natural track.
you're gonna say, now we've got, oh, look at what we can do.
It's free until it's not.
So I'm glad you brought that up.
I don't know, maybe, I'm not a rocket scientist.
Well, no, but I'm glad you brought that up. So does eCash actually, is it ledgered on a blockchain? It's not. It's not. It doesn't actually touch a blockchain. It is still a centralized ledger. And so is it like crypto? No, it's not. eCash is a true bearer instrument. Again, a crypto, a digital currency, Bitcoin, Binance, those are not bearer tokens. They are instruments of value, but it depends on who is backing that value. This is a US government-backed bearer token value, right? And so this is why it's not actually, it's digital currency, but it's not cryptocurrency. And so it does not require or involve settlement within a distributed ledger or blockchain. And that's the key here. It's not actually running on any blockchain rails. It's not using any hashes. It's just a ledger, right? And so going back to Chris's point, the Treasury Department said, okay, we're going to have our own ledger, and we'll have APIs that we'll let folks call out to. So going back to Chris's point, yes, the initial piece is, oh, we're not going to trace this. No, we're not going to do that. But
They want you to use it.
they want you to adopt it. But then once they get adoption, what happens? And so this is why the last, I want to say, so I want to be clear about this. This is still in bill form, right? It passed the House, it's in committee now, right? It still has to go to the Senate, still has to go to the President, right? So we're still way early in the game. That's why I'm surprised to see even this many people here to even talk about it, because a lot of people still aren't even talking about it. And so, you know, it's very, very early on here.
But let's
Sure.
talk from a positive standpoint. I mean, it's so funny because we were talking the last session, you know, what do you think when you read the headline, more and more working Americans are joining the Great Resignation?
Right.
Well, my 23-year-old daughter goes, oh, I like that, because it's rebellious. It's cool. They quit the employer.
But you gotta eat.
Right.
You still need
Bills have to be paid.
Right. She loves it because when we're young and we're ambitious, we realize, okay, yeah, I wanna rebel against the machine, whatever. But ultimately, at the end of the day, we're all trusting the machine. We're trusting this country. We're trusting all the little elements of it. We're
Right.
trusting. We hope that we have enough trust that we get pulled over and it really is a cop. He's going to do the right thing.
Right.
So, as an employer, now we talk about this, the transition from being an employee that quits and, yeah, I'm rebellious, or I become a real estate agent, or if I start to employ people, now I'm an employer.
Yep.
You're going to face all the same things that the employers are facing, that the kids, that your employees that quit. So anyway, so back to the government piece. I like that. I like the idea that we're innovating. I like the idea that we're innovating past the piece of
Correct.
paper.
Yeah,
But
absolutely.
ultimately, we have to trust that system. We have to trust our bank. We have to have some level of trust, and at least in our country, we can trust the systems more than we can in other countries. So, as an employer, it's funny, you learn what a bank is for.
Sure.
To me, at the end of the day, banks are pretty useless. I was very let down as an entrepreneur. Now in my 23rd year, I've been through 4 banks, and they're mostly all empty suits. They're just car salesmen that
Sure.
like, give me all this value, and I'll be there when you need me. No, you're not. They've all failed. right? But why are they still there? So the interesting thing is the government uses your local bank for accountability. So as an employer, how do I pay the government my taxes? It's deposited.
Yep. So, I mean, same
So
thing with your mortgage,
941
right?
plans,
Like,
right?
it's the same thing with your mortgage, right? Like, your mortgage is an easement from whichever local government in which your house
Right.
sits on the land of,
Right.
and you're paying into this monthly coffer to basically allow them to quote unquote let you live there, right? So going back to your point.
My
'cause
last
I-
thing.
Go ahead.
My last thing.
Mhm.
So if I'm going to be an employer, if I'm going to be someone who is paying the government taxes to pave my roads and things like that,
Sure.
and I hope that there will be a tax return if I pay too much, I'm trusting a system.
Sure.
And I hope that everyone else will play in that system if they're going to move here and live here. I'm okay with immigration. It's
Sure.
not like this side or the other. But if everybody's here, and then we're all going to rebel against the system and not pay anything, and the government, I'm avoiding taxes. And,
Sure.
Oh gosh, am I the only one that's going to pay for the paved road? Am I the only one paying for the cop?
No, that's fair. So
I'm
it-
okay with that.
Well, everything starts with just 1 second. Hold on. So everything starts with trust. Everything starts with level of trust in any relationship. What I would argue here is be informed,
Mm.
because the more informed you are,
This is great.
the better the more accountable you can hold those that you trust.
Right on.
Because without accountability, trust is irrelevant. And so I would argue that the purpose of both the bill and the conversations around the bill is, hey, we do want to offer our citizens the ability to have confidence in a digital dollar. And I think compared to other scenarios, I think they've done a better job of communicating that. It always starts with trust, but always keep accountability in mind. Yes, sir.
Yeah, I had a question
Mhm.
regarding this. Let's say the government move forward with this. What are some of the policies they're gonna put in place for consumers? You know, like with the bank, they say they back up to what, $250,000 of your funds if anything happens in terms of, embezzlement or whatever cases. What does that look like?
That's a great question. So part of eCash, or part of the bill rather, let's talk about the bill. So part of the bill, they have a list of items that are going to be critical to driving down consumer costs and bringing up consumer trust. Because that's effectively what this is, going back to Sam's point. It's basically saying, hey, let's take the bank out of this. Let's allow you to keep the money you've earned and then use it wherever you want digitally. And so part of that, and as I said before, it's still being baked in terms of if you lose that phone that has your $1,000 balance, will you get it back? We don't know, right? Like that's not a scenario that they've sort of outlined as this is the standard operating procedure if this happens.
Well, banks
Could
have
be backed up in your iCloud.
So,
Bank-
so
banks
this
don't
is
have
what
to be
this is what it
remote.
sounds like. So I have a banking background. It sounds like what you're saying is this concept here is similar to a debit card you buy from Publix. You lose that debit card, you lost that debit card.
Yeah.
Now what I'm talking about, the central bank digital currency is actually by the Fed, and that concept is actually going to remove the bank altogether eventually, and they send the money directly to you, kind of like a food stamp card. So the money you're getting is because they're talking about using this to also help implement. What is that where everybody gets $1,000? What is that called? That concept?
Stimulus.
Not
Oh,
stimulus.
universal.
Universal basic
yeah.
income, yeah.
So when they're going to apply that to it, but they're also going to go one step further where they're going to put an expiration date on the money that you're getting. So kind of like food stamps, where if you don't spend the money in that month,
You lose it.
that
Yeah,
money.
that makes
So
sense.
that's it sounds like what you're talking about is probably the step one before they go full central bank digital currency, and that's the article is actually from January 2022, and I can forward it to you guys.
so what-
You can
Well,
have
that's
a
interesting
copy
because the
of it.
central bank digital currency is another thing that I'm interested in because I was actually working on another startup that was working on interbank transfers.
Right.
And that's something they're trying to do because phone numbers don't work, emails don't work, and there's no unique distinguishing ID that has a true two-factor authentication. So I know that money got to you and didn't get to somebody who hijacked your identity. But that's a whole other topic.
Well, going back to the point. So yes, the difference though is if I lose my prepaid card, I can still get that money because ultimately I can still contact the central ledger that holds those funds. I'm legally bound, or that entity is legally bound to hold that money on my behalf. Whereas with eCash, that may not be the case, right? Like that may be the case, it may not be the case.
It
Right.
would actually be a great feature, right? Cause like my wallet, if I have $100, which I never do, because I have a wife who makes sure that when I have cash, somehow it sneaks out of my wallet.
Isn't that crazy how that happens?
I don't do that to her, but she does that to me. It's kind of funny.
Man, this is weird
But
virus
if I
going
did,
around.
in one of those rare days, I did have $100 in my wallet and I lost it, I'd feel sick. And I'm pretty sure I probably would never find it,
Yeah.
right? But if I had a digital eCash, I would hope that one of the benefits would be that somehow I could retrieve that $100.
And again, it goes back to the
Because that
question
would
about-
be, because that I would be more prone to use.
correct, exactly, right, exactly.
Because I could lose money all the time.
Correct, and so I think going back to the issue of trust, I think, so remember, to be clear, eCash or the Treasury and the Fed, they're operating independently essentially.
Yeah.
So there may be a case where eCash connects to a central digital token or something to that effect. I don't know, I just know about
Or
HR
it's a
70,
test or something.
yeah, 7132, right? And that specifically talks about the Treasury's version of their digital, their digital token. And so, part of it is, and I had a slide about what it actually means. So it's another option for the traditionally unbanked, right? So a lot of the businesses that Allison works with are with apps that create banking alternatives, like Claire. Claire is an app that was designed specifically for the underrepresented and minority communities that have multiple income sources, i.e. because they're a 1099 contractor or they work for a company that pays them out in increments, whatever the sort of background is. And so they work with a lot of unbanked folks. But effectively, Clear is actually a bank, right? Because they're using Allison as an intermediary. The other one is privacy, right? Because that's, again, at a top level, going back to the headline culture that we're in, that's literally the first headline when you read the first article on eCash. It's about privacy and how, just like I can use my dollar wherever I want, I'll be able to use this digital dollar much in the same way. Third-party censorship prevention and discrimination. So a lot of the bill talks about real estate and property management companies that deny services or have been taken for litigation for different things. The idea there is you lower the chance of that discriminatory procedure because I come in with cash versus me coming in with eCash. Or at least that's what they say, right? I'm not as familiar with that as
Brian, is the impetus here from the government standpoint that it is more efficient, less costly for them to get people a cash direct pipeline through eCash than say,
Correct, yeah.
say what we had,
Yep.
we have these hurricanes, like the first I ever really saw it was like, I think it was Katrina in New Orleans when they were giving literally Visa cash cards to people, like $500 cards to get people so they could get out of where they were and get
Correct.
to safety.
Yeah, even if we
And
talk
that
about
had to be costly for the government to give these $500 cash cards.
yes, yeah, and let's talk about that. So during the pandemic, right, we had the adoption of the PPP loans.
Yeah.
So one of the banks that I'm working with through Allison, they were like one of the top three PPP loan providers in the U.S. But they're a bank, right? So basically, the government said, "Hey, if you loan out this money, we will federally back it." That's the covenant that the federal government made with banks to loan those funds out to stimulate to stimulate the economy as things were kind of going south for us for a little bit. So this wasn't directly from the government. The government said, no, we'll just reimburse you for whatever you spend. It was the banks that was actually spending the capital. But in this scenario, it would be the Treasury Department issuing the actual capital versus having to go through the intermediary of an actual bank. So it really is displacing banks, which again, as a startup company that is building a bank first product, probably not the best thing. But again, I think there are other ways for us to work with banks to be able to adopt this, because at the end of the day, they're going to want a eCash ledger. And so that's kind of how our technologies go. But let's kind of wrap this part up, then I'll go to the full sort of Q&A session. So lack of reliable internet and digital network connectivity. So that's another one of the things that I was kind of like, I didn't know this was a real problem. But if you look at pockets of New Mexico, you look at pockets of Utah, you look at pockets of even in Florida, where high-speed internet is not easily accessible, folks kind of just can't really deal in digital currencies in that way. They can't deal in the Bitcoins of the world because they can't access Coinbase. They can't access
And not safe.
Bitcoin ATMs, things like that. So they need a reliable way to be able to transfer that. And ultimately, it's going to be through Bluetooth in terms of how eCash gets transferred to like a 7-Eleven or things like that. So it's not going to rely as much on the internet. And then our low income and cannot afford high transactions, high withdrawals, and exchange fees. So again, let's be honest here. We're talking about Black people, we're talking about Latino people, folks that don't have a lot of money to spend to begin with, so let alone to be able to pay, high fees and things of that sort. So this is how they're sort of positioning it, and I think it can be helpful for those things, but again, the devil's always in the details. And so as I say, HR 7231 is in the U.S. House. It's awaiting an up-down vote, so it's in committee right now. It'll go to an up-down vote here probably the next couple of months. Then at that point, it'll go to the Senate. If approved, obviously that's the caveat. Likelihood of approval is unclear once it hits the Senate. So senators have not really come out in droves to having any real opinions on eCash just because they just don't know enough yet. So So questions, comments, concerns?
With a digital wallet like that, what about water and corruption? So like, if you're talking about a Bluetooth device and I'm talking the beach, it's destroyed but not necessarily lost.
So that's a good question. So I've been trying to work, again, I want to be clear, I have, you all probably have more political connections in this room than I do. But I've been trying to work the banking folks that I know that are involved in that were involved in the creation of the bill. And so my question is centered around API availability and what type of information can we be pulling from the Treasury Department. And the questions have been centered around, again, keeping a operating ledger on behalf of an individual. Say if they are at the beach and something happens, does their money just go away at that point? Like to me, that would kill a document. Why would I want to take my $1,000 or my $10,000 from underneath my mattress and go convert it to eCash? When you're telling me if I drop my phone, which I'm prone to do, I'll never get my money back. I mean, that's
you can't move it from a device to device.
But so that would be my guess, is that it would be the UUID of the device, right? And then as it's linked to that UUID, there would be some sort of transfer mechanism. Again, these are things that I like thinking about, right? Like, because ultimately you can then offer solutions to these governing bodies and say, hey, here's how we can solve this problem for you. So it goes back to your point about solving problems. Folks just want results. And so if folks just want results, how do we work backward to get there? And so that's been one of the reasons why I've been so enamored with the idea of the Treasury minting a Bearer token, because this is really so as I'm going to have conversations with bank CEOs and I'm telling them, man, you gotta get with this fintech. This is how you're gonna make your money. You're not gonna make your money from checking account fees and the like. I now have the political backing to then show them, hey, here's why you need to adopt some sort of strategy where you're moving your ledger off of your traditional bank core, right? Mm-hmm. And so that, again, that's one of the reasons why, I'm just so passionate about it.
So I got two thoughts. I mean, the reason that we're using the bank now is really just to hold it. We used to make interest, you're right, we don't now. But to do our transactions, we're moving it back and forth. So even Venmo almost acts like a bank.
Not almost. So I'm glad you brought that up. So a lot of people ask me, what is the real value of Allison? I'm gonna be self-indulgent for a moment. The real value of Allison is that it's connecting an entity that needs a bank level license with an actual bank, so that they don't have to go out and get them. Because what did Venmo do? Venmo raised $20 million and spent that money on just getting bank level licensing. They went out to OCC and got a bank charter and said, hey, we are now a MTO, a money transfer organization operator in all 40 some odd states that require that license. Because in the US, if you hold even $1 on behalf of another person, the federal government wants you to be regulated as a bank. Mm-hmm. That's how that works. And so Venmo said, no, we're not gonna do that. We'll just go ahead and get bank level licensing. But these other companies that don't have the money that Venmo has and don't have the runway, they say, hey, are there any companies out there that will connect us to a bank for the purposes of OCC chartering?
Yeah.
That's where Allison comes in. So I'm glad you brought that up.
So,
Because what's so interesting is when I'm doing a transaction, even with my own bank, so take Venmo out of it, you know, the dollar you hold up has a serial number
Yep.
on it, it has traceability, it has the time it was minted.
a little DNA.
How do you, yeah, but how's my bank trust?
Exactly. So yes.
It's even easier with the bank. 'Cause
But my point is, what's the unique identity of the dollars in my account right now, which I've never seen and never will?
Exactly.
Like, they were brought in from an employer, I pay bills with them, my bank account goes up and down, but I never see the real identity of that dollar.
Correct. Yes. Until it becomes physical, until this gets into your hand and you give it to someone else, it's not even real.
Yeah,
It's not real.
I know.
It's just your balance, your checking balance, and you decide to take it out in physical cash. That is how they want eCash to operate. They want it to operate much in the same way.
So my point, when people have to talk, I don't know if I can trust it, I don't know if I can trust eCash. Well, we've got so much trust right now, it's already the Wild West, isn't it?
A lot of trust and not necessarily, backed up with that much accountability.
Right. Exactly.
Right, yeah.
Well, one of the things I did when I was working with women's shelters and homeless for a little while. So I was doing almost the opposite version of this. And one of the challenges is that people would come out of they come out of a rough situation. They had no ID, they had no driver's license, they had no security, social security card. They didn't have anything.
Sure.
And it was like, how do I get them paid? I have no way to transfer them money. And so one of the workarounds we figured out was you could get a Green Dot card from Dollar Tree.
Yep.
And it had a routing and checking number. And so through that routing and checking number, you could set up a PayPal account. And then, so within 24 hours, I was able to get them a digital account that we were able to verify through a routing and checking number, because the Green Dot card that I bought for $1 at Dollar Tree had a routing and checking number, which then backed them into a bank account without having an ID to
Correct.
open a bank account,
Yep.
to be able to give them something that I could pay them.
Wow.
So you just explained the scenario that I pitched. So when I initially created Allison, that was the scenario that I pitched. I said, how do we get this person who doesn't have the proper ID to get to step 2? How do we get them from step 1 to step 10?
Mm-hmm.
And so it all boiled around that identity management. And so yeah, I mean those things like that have to happen every day, because
Yeah, and it was just,
Systems
it was
are so
amazing.
convoluted.
I mean, those women who were leaving, an abusive situation, they just left.
Right.
And they didn't worry about, did I have my wallet, or did I have all my birth certificate or
Yeah.
marriage certificate or all these other things that they needed. And I literally took them through the process of trying to get all this identification. And I'm like, but I need a way to pay you today.
Yep.
And it was like boom, and it was like, okay, now we found us workaround. And then when working with the Homeless Coalition, we started looking at, okay, now how do I transfer someone something? How do I create this type of environment where, again, I don't carry cash. Give me a QR code, boom, I can get you a couple bucks that you can now use to spend for the night.
All you do is ask an illegal alien, probably. They probably have figured all that out. Because I'm sitting there thinking, okay, so a lot of illegal aliens seem to be happy. I mean, they found a way to exist in the U.S. without those forms of identification or anything, but how are they paying the bills? How are they transferring money? Even if they're being paid in cash, how do you buy services and goods? Just the whole flow of money is...
Sure. Yeah, and I think that, so part of this conversation is, hey, this is what eCash is gonna look like or potentially look like for you as a consumer. But going back to your initial point about entrepreneurship, I think there's a lot of opportunity in understanding this, right? Because
This is unbelievable.
I think if you even solve, so going back to your scenario, Tracy, if you solve even 30% of what you just laid out and wrap the solution around just that 30%, someone will pay for it, right? There will be businesses that will pay for just that piece. And so even just outside of, hey, how does this help me as a buyer, as a person that just consumes, as a business person, this is also something that could be potentially lucrative for folks that really want to do a deep dive into it. So
So we probably should sit down.
we should. Just gotta be honest with you.